Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Bean Turtle, and today I've got for you guys the F-16A ADF. This fighter up here is one of the things you can get if you're working, on the with the A10 or all of these other premiums like the F4S. It's actually not a I put in quotes mandatory vehicle, but it's one of the more fun vehicles that you could use at this BR, and it's actually better than the F-16A that it's foldered with. To get down to the F-16C, you only need to research the F-16A. But then the F-16C will actually be half price research wise. So the folded vehicle is always half price in research. If we look at the right here, for instance, I have these folded vehicles that I haven't researched. This one is 260,000 research points, whereas this one will only be 150,000. So that roughly about half of the research. So it's going to be quicker to get. And I fully recommend taking the extra time to get the F-16A because it is really fun. While it has a pretty simple set of loadouts and only is made for pure air-to-air fighting, it has an incredible flight model, very similar, in fact, to the 13.7 F-16C. In fact, it's even faster and more maneuverable in some situations than the F-16C. In some cases, the ordnance that you put on the F-16C actually makes this perform worse than the F-16A ADF, which is pretty cool. And so there are actually some pretty fun reasons to use it, even though you can technically match the quote better F-16C in a full up tier. I'm pretty sure when this F-16 first came out, it did not actually have access to Sparrows, and so AIM-7Ms really make this thing better than it was. Originally, I'm pretty sure the only lineup opportunities were just AIM-9Ls. We're talking like two and a half years ago. The Sparrows make this plane absolutely amazing because they give you a pretty nice way with two of them to take out planes in head-ons that aren't suspecting you, take out people out of the sky, even do some limited beyond visual range combat, and it goes well with the fact that the plane is really good at dodging enemy radar missiles as well. We also have on this thing AIM-9Ls. AIM-9Ls are really good radar missiles, at least in as long as they're not flared. AIM-9Ls are actually quite good against taking down planes with 30 Gs max overload, and they will actually guide for quite a while, even though rocket motor doesn't last that long. They have pretty good range, and they're all aspect missiles, which means if someone is coming directly at you, you can launch a missile at them that way. However, these things, as if you probably saw my A10 video, these things are extremely flare hungry. You have to know when and where is a good idea to actually fire the things. Otherwise, they won't actually hit their target because they'll just follow the nearest bright spot or the sun. They really like doing not what they're supposed to do sometimes, but other times they will net you some pretty nice, pretty easy kills. Also, effectively, the entire loadout is researched by default with the exception of flares and chaff and AIM-9Ls. So flare chaff is, of course, a modification you have to research, which gives you access to chaff, not both, which chaff honestly isn't that necessary at top tier anymore. Though it does help you dodge some radar missiles and throw off low tier radars. So if you get 11-7 down tier, you can actually just use chaff sometimes to just completely blind it and confuse it and lose locks. But that's usually not what's going to happen. I'll talk more about how this thing has a very strange BR placement and how that really affects how this thing is played. Loadout-wise, though, the only thing that really makes a huge difference beyond, of course, the general performance increases, a lot of these do a lot, actually. These modifications here do a lot of really good stuff for your performance of the plane, but in terms of loadouts, the only thing that really changes things is this right here, which gives you an extra 2 AIM-9Ls. That's it. Otherwise, this is the default loadout because they changed how stock planes get missiles now. So most stock planes will have access to something radar, something IR. You'll have something. It used to be back in the olden days that you didn't get any missiles at all until you researched them. So stock was really painful, but that was 2 years ago again. Last thing for loadouts, this thing actually isn't that fuel hungry. I recommend taking 30 minutes of fuel in your plane and a drop tank. The reason for the drop tank is that while this thing actually isn't that fuel hungry, you have that full 30 minutes of fuel to dogfight with, and there are occasions where you will fly long enough to where you'll run out of fuel or come close to if you didn't take that drop tank, which is an extra free 10 minutes, or it's enough to get to the battlefield at full afterburner without stopping. So I just like that. It's more convenient. I'm pretty lazy about fuel. I don't care about optimal whatever. I just like having fuel the whole time. That's what I would recommend, is just to take one drop tank and then bind it to a key that you can, sort of remember and drop it once you get into a dogfight, because it does sort of hurt your maneuverability. You also have a really good cannon and cannon CCIP. Not that cannon ground computers does that much for you, but it does allow you to take out a few ground targets, which I do every once in a while. If I can't find a target, I'll go pick off a ground target. If it's early on in the game and I want to get a free first strike, you can just go drop low, hit a truck on the way in, and keep going, and you'll get a free little bit of extra silver lions and research while you're at it. The gun is super accurate, has extremely good rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, so that's a lot. And it's also very high velocity, so you don't have the issue that other planes have, like the various Russian Gish guns. These things have actually very bad velocity, so it's sometimes very difficult to hit targets and merges. The F-16 ADF doesn't have any of those issues at all. And also with the radar, you have access to a radar gunsight, which is that if you're locked onto a target, you can actually lead the gun. It'll give you a little indicator where you should put your nose effectively, or it'll show you where the cannon rounds will land in comparison to the plane if you get a radar lock. I've had weird instances though where the crosshair will like jump back and forth, so that happens sometimes. In that situation, just kind of like between the two spots that it gives you, just kind of spray a good line across and you'll probably hit it. And good news for you, because of that, you actually have enough ammo to do that. 512 rounds is not a huge amount. It's not nothing though. 512 is the same number that you get on the F-15E and the F-16C, because they're effectively the same guns. The 512 rounds does not last forever. So you're firing short bursts, in my opinion. But if you're firing short bursts and you're very careful about it, you can get off a huge number of kills, I would say. This thing will kill in 5 bullets. It's not like you have to be that careful about it, I would say. However, sometimes you do want to let go on the trigger just to take out something like, say you're doing a head-on with an A-10, you don't really want to let the A-10 nuke your face off. You want to kind of spray a little bit and get out of the way, so they don't have a chance to destroy you. Another change from when I was using this before, and even from a couple of weeks ago, Gaijin has attempted to implement what is called real shatter into missiles, and so they've made it to where the way missiles work is very different now, but similar to how guns work. So if you look at how cannon rounds kind of work, you see those little pellets that come out. That's real shatter, where the idea is that like they explode into weird little pellets and stuff, and those pellets are what actually deal damage. They've tried to implement that for missiles, and with interesting effects. Some of the effects of that are that missiles don't actually kill you sometimes, and then missiles that probably shouldn't kill you instantly kill you, which is absolutely hilarious and kind of frustrating. This happens both to you and to the enemy. If you get a good head-on with a missile, usually it'll take them out, but sometimes critical hits will absolutely do no damage, which is very weird. And like for instance, there was one time where I quote crit a J7 or something and just took off like a little piece of his wing, and he was totally fine. And so that's annoying, but that but that's something that is in the game for everyone. You can even survive direct hits from things and such like that because of this change. That means that if occasionally your missiles kind of blank, which again is pretty rare, they still will kill things. They've patched the missiles being useless thing. That means that if you have a missile that just occasionally does no damage, that's what's going on. And if you shoot an Su-25 and it does no damage, that's just how Gaijin models this thing, because Russia or something. Okay, and now for basic beyond visual range combat and how to survive at your battle rating. Beyond visual range combat is not actually something I would really recommend doing with the ADF, and that's just because other planes that you will be fighting have better missiles than you, and it's easier for them to do so. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it. However, the way it works is you've got on your radar here, you've got the screen, you've got these various lines. If you see a line, if you see 2 lines on a single target that are moving together, that's a friendly. If you see a line with brackets around it or just a straight line across the radar, that is an enemy target that you can lock onto. A kind of nice keybind for you to pick if you're looking at a series of targets, but there are actually multiple targets up there, which is of course something that happens a good bit. There are 16 players on the enemy team, and so you'll see more than one radar signature a couple of times. But select radar/IRST target to lock allows you to cycle between those targets on your radar, where you can choose which one you're specifically wanting to look at. This is very important for things such as the F-14 and using AIM-120s effectively, but it also helps out with normal like Sparrows and that kind of thing. More conventional radar missiles are helpful for that. I have it set up to one of my number pad keys, but you can set this to whatever works for you, of course. But once you've chosen a target and say you want to hit it, you of course want to make sure that you're within range of your missiles. Sparrows that are what you're using have a lock range of 40 kilometers. And a launch range of 100 kilometers. I would never try either of those numbers. Those are really high. The closest I would recommend trying, assuming you can keep a consistent radar lock, is maybe 30, maybe 25. I would lean towards 25 kilometers. Of course, because the closer you are to the enemy is the less time the enemy has to maneuver away and dodge your missile, as well as notch your radar, because this thing has no seeker head of its own. AIM-120s will guide themselves once they get within 8 or 16 kilometers, I don't remember which. The AIM-7Ms will just fall out of the sky the second you lose a lock, so you have to keep that in mind. You're limited here. But if you want to try to hit a target up in the air, say a person who's flying up into the stratosphere to waste time in an air realistic match, you can actually seriously launch this thing up to 100 kilometers. And good news for you, if you do that, this missile can go up to Mach 4, assuming that you loft the missile correctly and that sort of thing. So this thing can really go quickly. 75-second missile time, guidance time. So if you're close-ish to the target that's really far away, you get a minute and 15 seconds for that missile to walk into the target. And then 25 Gs of maximum overload means that you can it's pretty hard to dodge kinetically, but it is not impossible. And so once you've launched your target, you of course have to keep radar lock on that target until it hits. Otherwise, you will miss the target. But what I actually recommend doing is what you're seeing in the background a lot more of, which is actually using your radar lock, your head-on radar lock, which has only a range of maximum of 19 kilometers, to lock targets that are close to you or even flying directly at you within point-blank range, I would say, which comes down to about less than 6 kilometers. Not that that's point-blank, but that's the point anyways. You're supposed to be really close. I use this thing super aggressively, much more so than I ever would with like the F-16C or other top-tier vehicles. And so I fly directly at targets, bob and weave between hills and mountains, that kind of thing, lock people coming right at me, hand them a missile, hopefully it hits them. If it doesn't, you just keep going, because you don't have enough time, per se, in some situations to actually pull around and dogfight people, because there are just so many of them. It's not that I wouldn't. I would love to pull into merges and do fancy maneuvers and such, but a lot of the times if you do that, a third or a fourth or a fifth plane will come shoot you, you'll get hit with the Sparrow from someone else, etc. You get the point. Another basic description of notching. Notching is when you're getting radar locked, and I'll show you, of course, a couple examples on screen. But when you are being radar locked or someone has launched a radar missile at you, you have a couple of options, but the easiest and most efficient one is to notch the radar. What you do is you take a 90-degree turn from whatever is locking you, pull as many Gs as you can. If you are close to the target, if you have a good distance, you could take time and not black out your pilot. And then once you're at about a 90-degree angle, you can release chaff to confuse the radar further if the missile is still locked onto you. Some missiles have assists that will continue tracking into you. The AIM-7M is only radar guided. That's what the SAR means, S-A-R-H. However, there are some missiles that actually get assists to continue into your plane. For example, the part of why the R-27ER seems so oppressive in some cases is that it's radar guided. However, it also has IOG, which I don't quite know what IOG means. However, I know what it does. IOG means that the once radar lock is lost, it will continue following where it thinks the person is. And so it'll continue to track in the direction and with the direction and speed that your plane is going. So with that kind of missile, if you just only take the 90-degree turn, the missile will still track into where it thinks you will be, which means you have to dodge it a little bit more. And so that's why the R-27s are so much more dangerous in some cases. That's where you want to use chaff, because you want to take the radar and make the radar that's giving data to that missile bad information. So the missile wants to follow where the radar sees shiny aluminum foil, which is what chaff is. Of course, another way to do this is to stay super low. You don't even really need to notch in some situations, depending on where the player is. If the player has, say, an F-14 and is lobbing AIM-54s at you, or the Farkors from the IRIF, which is of course, the Iranian F-14. You want to actually really dodge F-14's missiles, but for the most part, Sparrows and stuff will just fly into the ground because they don't quite know where to hit you. If you stay really low, and so I'm talking about under 40 meters off the ground, radars will have a really hard time locking you, and visually they will show like your plane is here, but the radar will show you here on their screen, and so the radar missile will try to hit that where it thinks you are, which is it's going to fly into the ground because it can't quite discern you versus the ground. And so that happens a lot when I'm really, really low. The missiles will just hit the ground below you or fly right over you because they can't quite get to you. However, remember that the ground is undefeated. This is both a benefit to you and a potential way to die. Trees are made of stellinium in this game, and if you hit a tree, you die. Obviously, you hit a tree and die in real life, but trees will kill you, and trees are like 40 feet tall or 40 meters tall in War Thunder. So remember that is a guaranteed way to get sent back to the hangar. However, the ground can also help you to defeat missiles. If there's a missile that you're not going to be able to dodge, if you dip between a mountain and a missile, or a mountain and a radar source, the mountain will always win. The mountain will save you from that missile. So you'll see a lot of times where I will hit a target, or hop up, fire a missile, or hop up, shoot at someone, and then dive back down into cover in the mountains. So that's what I would recommend y'all doing too. And it's a lot of fun, actually. Like once you master flying really low, it becomes really hard for people to actually do anything about you, and so you just get to kind of run around, hop out of the ground, and do damage and leave. What I would recommend also as a last little thing, your AIM-9Ls, I would recommend, even though it says you can launch them up to 11 kilometers away, I would never recommend firing one of these outside of 3, maybe 4 kilometers. It will lock before that. Even though it says lock range of in all aspect is about 3 kilometers, it's closer to 5. But I would never launch one of these missiles any further away than about 3 or 4 kilometers, because it just won't hit the target. Unless the target is a willing creature, which means that the target is like flying in a straight line, not going super fast. That's what my definition of a willing creature is. Otherwise, you're not going to hit it. So I would fire within about 3 kilometers. And remember that you're fast. You're capable of going Mach almost 1.14. So like this thing can very easily catch up to targets. This is the F-15E of mid-high tier. I would use it that way. You are quick. You can catch up to people. Use the missiles as a bonus, kind of, I would say, or a way to end up catching someone that's not paying attention. And that's another thing. Players at this BR are kind of ruthless. They have eyes every single degree of the circle, and so they do know you're looking at them. And for the most part, if they're busy trying to kill someone, you can sneak up on them. But if the person is not busy looking forward, they're probably looking behind them. Or just expect that occasionally people will flare your missile immediately or pre-flare you. Sometimes the AIM-9L will still hit targets if they leave their afterburners on. So as a bit of warning for people who aren't you, your afterburner is really hot. When someone fires an IR missile at you, cut your afterburner. Therefore, it has nothing to go for but the flares that are really bright. Because this is really hot. If this is off, or cut at least, like less hot, then it's going to go after your flares. So that's how one of the things you do. And when you get to the upper BRs with AIM-9Ms and R-73s, that's how you dodge them. You cut your afterburners, and then you drop flares, and you have to turn away from the target. Otherwise, it'll just continue to find the target that it was fired at. Now, the next section, I wanted to talk about its BR placement. The BR placement is very interesting. Being at 12.7 BR means that you're just in the perfect middle between 13.7, which is where you have a lot of AIM-120s, and of course, like right at the top of the BR where radar missiles start to be good. Because of the incredibly high number of premiums around this BR, specifically the F-4S, the F-20, and the new F-A-18C, you have the Mirage F-1C-200 for the French, and then you have the Swedish JA-37D. Because of all of these premiums, there are actually a huge number of times that you will just get a 12.7 game, or you'll get a 13.0 game, or you'll get a game at 12-0, which means that a lot of the time what you're actually getting is at your BR. So this is one of the few vehicles that actually kind of plays at a reasonably good BR, if that makes sense. You'll also see a lot of, because they just added this, the F-2A. This one's, of course, a premium. At 13.0, it says 12.7, 12.3, but this thing is actually 13.0 and air realistic. You'll see this a good bit because this is brand new, and it has some scarier missiles like the AAM-3, which have infrared countermeasures, which means they're flare resistant. But however, this is only slightly above your battle rating and doesn't perform as well as you. This premium also means that you're not going to really go above 13.0. So you'll see a lot of Phantoms, you'll see a lot of F-18s, and you'll see a lot of the F-2As, oddly enough, right now. So that means that you really don't see full up tiers or full down tiers. Full down tiers would actually include things such as the MiG-23ML, and so premiums like that, but also stuff like, the Tech Tree MLD. Full down tier to 11.7 would be this Su-25, and you also outperform all of those planes that I've mentioned, except maybe the F-18. And at least the only reason you wouldn't outperform the F-18 is because it has a Cobra button and you do not. But the F-16A pretty much destroys everything else in the game in terms of maneuverability, except maybe some of the crazy stuff like the Su-33. And even then, it's a pretty fair duel, I would say. But because of all those premiums down there, you usually don't get full up tiers, but you also don't get full down tiers. If you get into a BR with F-4Ss and a bunch of Phantoms, you can pretty much clean the floor with them, because you outperform them. And then they only get rear aspect missiles, so you get an advantage over that already. So AIM-9Hs, as you can see here. And then, of course, they get AIM-7F Sparrows, which aren't as good as the Sparrows you get. You get AIM-7Ms. And your gun is actually internal, which doesn't create drag, whereas the F-4S has an external gun only that is terrible. Straight better across the board. In the off chance that you do get a full up tier, you're fighting F-15C, F-16C. You're going to see, of course, the F-14s. Specifically the B is in the up tier bracket, but you're kind of isolated from the scariest stuff because this is 14.0 and you're 12.7, so that you can only see a 13.7, and that also means that all of these planes, the 13.7s, get pushed all the way up. So if we look at like Japan, for instance, with the new F-2A, this F-2A that's at 13.7 that has AIM-120 equivalents, this is actually getting shoved up to 14.0. This Gripen is being pulled up to 13.0 or 14.0. The Eurofighters, of course, are going to pull everyone up to 14.0, right? So there are a lot of things that are pulling the enemies out of that BR bracket that are really your scary things. But even then, full up tiers really aren't that bad. All you have to do is fly low, and AIM-120s can't hit you. All you have to do is pre-flare, and also flare correctly to dodge an R-73 or a AIM-9M. So this thing is actually in a really unique position to kind of be really good in both up tiers and down tiers. And you get kind of mid tiers, which are like these 13.0, 13.3 games, or 12.3, 12.0 games, where you don't really have to worry about what you're seeing. It's kind of weird. It's a very different experience than playing anything else. In fact, the F-16A ADF, the way that the game feels in terms of up tiers and down tiers, is pretty much the way the game should be, in my opinion. I've always thought for a while that BRs should be plus or minus 0.7 or 0.6, so you could only get plus 0.7 or 6 above your BR or below your BR, because a full up tier from, say, the difference between the F5 and the F105 is so absurd. And even though this is a bomber, of course, or a strike craft, I put in quotes, as a bomber, the difference in performance and utility is so absurd that why should these two be against each other? And then in the same regard, this thing is so different and less capable of turning and that sort of thing than the F4s, that why the heck are they able to match each other, right? And so if it was plus minus 0.7, you'd have a bunch of these sub BRs where a lot of these planes are capable of playing where they're supposed to, while not being way outclassed every other game, or the majority of the games, as it tends to feel. And that also kills issues like the A-10 nuking the F-104 without flares, etc. And this plane actually kind of feels like that. Even if the enemy does has the occasional AMRAAM, or you run into rare planes such as the Kafir C-10 13.0 plane with derbies, which are closer range semi-active homing missiles. Even if you run into something like this, it's really not that hard to dodge those missiles. The same way that you would dodge other things. It's literally the same action, just stay low or take a 90-degree turn. But the other thing that is irritating with all the premiums, games end super quickly. I'm talking like games will last 4 or 5 minutes total because all of the F4Ss die immediately. The F4Ss that don't die immediately get usually 1v40'd by the other team. A lot of the other premiums, it's about the same story. It's not always one-sided. It's not always your team gets destroyed. Sometimes you're on the other team because the matchmaker is mostly filled with American planes. You get kind of put everywhere. Everyone gets kind of put everywhere. It's not good guys versus bad guys. It's usually USA, China, Russia, blah, 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 versus USA, China, Russia, Germany. You know, you get the point. It's always everyone versus everyone. But that does mean that on occasion you'll get into a game where all of the players that are playing other teams that tend to be more experienced are against you, and everyone that is a new player is on one team, on your team. And so those games end really quickly. Other times it's the reverse. Other times you get to eat a free lunch. And that's about it with this plane. This plane is really good, but it is also kind of one-dimensional. Very, very fun dogfighter. I hope you enjoy it. I do have a lot of games, though, that I remember recently where I've just gone 1-0 or 1-1 and that kind of thing. And that's just kind of the fault of the way our air realistic plays right now. There are just not that many players that are capable of surviving more than 15 seconds. So a lot of the times you'll only get like one kill. A lot of times the enemy team will focus you because they see F-16 and freak out. So that can happen sometimes as well. And then using the F-16A, you can effectively research everything at rank 7 and 8. So if you have anything left over, like I do, like the F-18 and the F-18A and C that just came out not long ago, you can use the F-16A ADF to research all of them at a pretty favorable BR that doesn't involve infinite AIM-120 spam. So that is pretty nice in my opinion. The downside, though, however, even if you talisman an F-16A or whatever, you can't use this to research anything below 7.0. So say they add, like, I don't know, a Tech-Tree F-111 or something here. I doubt they would ever, or F-117 here. I don't think they'd ever do that. But if they did, you couldn't use this to efficiently research the thing. You'd get a debuff to your research, whereas the F-4S can research every single plane in the US Tech Tree. So that is a bit of a bonus and a difference between the two that I would say keep in mind. But it's this, whenever they add like rank 9 and they add like the F-22 or something, you could use it to research that. Believe it or not, that may actually happen. But thanks everyone for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all very much for subscribing and stuff. I've seen a lot of people, a lot of positive comments of the last little bit. I'm glad y'all are liking my A10 guide, and I plan to continue to make videos like that, as well as eventually I'll make a guide of, or a video of like me just obliterating people on the ground with the A10, because I've done that a good bit. It's pretty fun to use in ground realistic. If you have any specific requests for videos, of course, you drop it in the comments. I'll look into it. I don't have everything in every tree, of course. The only one that I've really done everything on effectively is the US tree. There are only a few things I don't have, like the claws that just came out, for instance. I got some work to do in terms of grinding still, but there are a lot of things that I can still do if you guys want help with specifics, and I'd be more than happy to help out. Because it's honestly quite fun to do that, and also to impart knowledge. That's always good. If you really like my stuff, I actually have memberships, and so if you become a channel member, I'll shout your name out. I'll do that at the end of videos. I'll figure out how to make a role for you in my Discord, etc. And on that, join my Discord. We've got some friends joining in, talking about cool stuff. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Next plane video will be on the F4 Phantom 2. Which is F4E Phantom 2, which is one of my favorites because of its lower BR, but also because of its really good weaponry. And so I hope you'll stay tuned for that, and have a great day.